This needs to happen. Nobody likes to say Mexico is a cartel state. 8 of the top 10 most dangerous cities in the world are in Mexico right now. There was more homicides in Mexico than Middle East wars over the past several years.
Trump day one, lots of stuff happening.
There's so many things on the line from a business standpoint that I'm like, is he going to change something? Is he going to address this?
It's very clear he's pardoning him for any of the stuff.
What actually happened? Was there something really bad that happened that would have had all these people end up in prison? And are we ever going to know?
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Capitalist Podcast. My name is Austin Bronner. I'm here with my co-host, as always, Cody Shirk. What's up, Cody? How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm trying to stay warm like everybody in the United States. I'm definitely in the warmest spot of the U.S., but I'm still a little chilly. So I shouldn't complain, though, compared to North Dakota. I saw negative 50 in some city in North Dakota. That's suicidal for me.
It's suicidal because you just freeze. You just wouldn't know how to dress.
That's death. Negative 50? I mean, I don't
know.
even know what that is in Celsius, but that's death, right? You die in that.
Oh, it's for sure.
That temperature.
For sure. I mean, it's you have to be in like the most. You have very little time. So I heard you had an interesting dinner this week.
So
what tell us about it.
Yeah, my wife and I are just sitting at a date night dinner. By the way, if you're married, important thing to do. Once a week, good for your relationship, go on a date. So we're having dinner, and I see a small group of people walk by, and I kind of catches my eye, and I take a second look, and I'm like, is that Barack Obama? And I'm in Jupiter, Florida, which, by the way, is like not the area where you would think Obama's hanging out in. And lo and behold, it's him. It's
so
Obama.
Is he down at Mar-a-Lago? Is that what it is?
So that's what I'm suspecting. This was a couple days before the inauguration, which is a whole nother story. I could go conspiracy theory. Was Obama down here in Florida to help the transition to Trump, which means that was Obama really running the government for the past 4 years? Or was he just down here because of all the, quote, festivities? Either way, he sat at a table, a couple tables down from me, and it was pretty interesting. Secret Service all over the place. They're all plain clothed. You didn't really know unless you knew Obama was sitting there.
In the moment, it's like one of those things. Once you see, you see it all.
Totally, yeah. Before I saw him, I didn't realize that Secret Service had to walk through the restaurant prior to kind of scope out what was going on. And then when we left the restaurant, we saw all the black Suburbans out front and all the government vehicles. So I was like, okay, that was him. And so I had dinner with Obama. That was
there you go.
That was my claim to fame.
South Florida has not South Florida. I mean, you're kind of, what would you consider South Florida? You're not South Florida. You're mid-Florida.
I am. I'm at the very northern end of South Florida. So if you know Florida at all, Jupiter is the very north part of Palm Beach County. So anything south of Jupiter is South Florida, and Miami is about an hour and a half south of me, about an hour and a half. Which is a pretty big area, but I would say that's what you would consider as South Florida. And quick note, I have a lot of friends who've been calling me over the past year considering making a move to Florida, because Florida 10 years ago was like, what? It's like snowbirds and retirees, and like, what are you doing there? Now it's the place to be. So I have a lot of friends from California, from New York. Hey, should I come down to Florida? And I tell people, yes, you can come to Florida, but don't bring whatever politics you're escaping from.
Don't bring it with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't bring it with you. Don't bring the wildfires either.
Yeah, don't do that either.
So we got a big episode today. Lots of stuff to talk about. This is a really exciting week. First, I'm going to dive in and just mention we've got a dinner in Austin, Adventure Capitalist Investment Dinner on February 20th. If you'd like to attend, it's going to be really fun. We have, I think we have like 14 people right now. Maybe
I think we have one or two
left.
Seats left. Yeah. I got to check the list. We might be full.
We rented a very cool cellar in a beautiful restaurant in Austin, Texas. It is a very, very cool venue. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So if you want to come, reach out. You can just email austin.bronner@gmail.com, and we'll give you the details. And would love to see you there. So let's dive in. Big week. Trump is president again. We're going to start here. It's the biggest news, but we want to talk about some things that maybe didn't make the news as much. So Trump is president again. He was inaugurated this week, but before he was inaugurated, we want to talk a little bit about what happened, which I think was quite interesting and kind of was swept a little bit under the rug. There's a little bit of conversation about it, but it kind of got missed, which is Biden ended his presidency with a bunch of pardons in the last few days, some of the last few hours. In fact, it was a record number of pardons and a bunch of unusual ones. Specifically his family members. He issued preemptive pardons to 5 of his immediate family members, including his siblings and their spouses. That was very interesting. He pardoned Fauci. So Fauci, former director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases.
Do you see when the pardon goes back to?
It goes back to the 2014, right?
January 1st, 2014. And
before any of the gain and function stuff going on.
And the conspiracy theorists out there. I say conspiracy theorists.
I don't even think it's really conspiracy theorists. It's like, it's very clear he's pardoning him for any of the gain or function stuff.
For sure. But you could also, what I was going to say, a lot of people are pointing their fingers to, that's when I say we, the U.S. government helped overthrow the government in Ukraine, which a lot of people are suspecting a lot of labs are there in Ukraine. Again, that's probably the conspiracy part, but there's pretty clear date alignment with what's going on there and his involvement with whatever was going on and the date of his pardon being, this is 11 years ago. He's pardoned for anything 11 years in the past. That's wild.
And if you listen to my prediction episode, I think one of the things I said was Fauci was going to go to jail. So this is not going to happen, but it was probably going to happen potentially. And now he's pardoned at the last minute.
Those poly market odds, great odds. We talked about the poly market odds too. Some people made a lot of money on that bet.
That he was going to be pardoned?
In the last moment. People made a ton of money on that bet.
Yeah, that was true. What was it, like 10% or something like that?
It was like 10 to 1 odds or something like that.
Yeah.
So some people made some big money.
Mark Milley, the retired General Mark Milley, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was pardoned, as well as a bunch of January 6th committee members of the staff of the House committee that investigated the January 6th riot, including Liz Cheney. So interesting. What was the most shocking for you?
I want to try and play devil's advocate here because I think this is just a weak way to leave presidency, just basically trying to protect all these people that were possibly in huge trouble. The devil's advocate part is that, Trump was going to come after all these people if he hadn't pardoned them. I think that's what a lot of defenders of this pardoning process would say. But I mean, this is pretty wild here because this basically neutralizes the entire January 6th thing, meaning Biden pardoned all of his people and then Trump just pardoned all of the Jan 6ers. We'll get into that in a second. So it's like nothing ever happened. Everyone got excused from this event.
It cleared the decks.
And then the whole health thing with Fauci, but also other people just involved in there. I think it just leaves a really bad taste in everyone's mouth. Like, what actually happened? Like, was there something really bad that happened that would have had all these people end up in prison? And are we ever going to know? Are we just going to forget about this because they got pardoned? Is anybody ever going to do an investigation to figure out like what was actually going on? And I don't know, but it's definitely unsettling.
There was an interesting clip of Biden who was asked if he was going to pardon himself.
Have you ruled out a pardon for yourself or any other additional members of the family?
For myself?
Yes, sir.
What would I pardon myself for?
That's what I'm asking.
No, I have no contemplation of pardoning myself for anything. I didn't do anything wrong.
Mr. President.
They're like, are you going to pardon yourself? And he was like, why would I do that? I didn't commit any crime. Like, I'm not going to pardon myself. And it's interesting because he then went on and pardoned his family and Fauci. I think it's his brother, James, which was, who's the one that's in the most hot water for testifying to Congress and lying about his brother's influence peddling. So there's a bunch of stuff there. I think the biggest one surprises me is his family members. Kind of makes sense though if you're thinking like, well, he's just got this opportunity. He's about to die. Like he's at the end of his life. There's really no consequences. He's just like, F it.
Yeah,
You're all clear.
I think
you're all good.
he's probably concerned that Trump's going to go after every single one of his family because, frankly, that's what Biden and whoever the deep state is did to Trump, to every single one of his family. You know, Eric Trump had over 100 subpoenas in 2024, and Eric's like kind of removed. I mean, he's definitely part of the Trump part, but he's not Donald Trump. So all his family members got attacked from all sides, and I think Biden was concerned the same thing is going to happen to him.
Yeah, I don't think it sets a good precedent. It's over. It's all good. We're moving on. Let's move on to Trump day one. So Trump day one, lots of stuff happening, right? There's, I think, 42 executive orders, 115 personnel actions, over 200 executive actions. And yeah, a bunch of these executive orders with a lot more to come. So do you want to dive into some of these and talk about some of the ones that you find interesting?
Yeah, I guess I'm pretty political because we're talking about politics all the time. I just feel like this is really relevant to investing in international events. So we've been extra focused on this.
It's like you're skating where the puck is going, right? And a lot of times you get signals about what's going to happen when you look at some of the executive orders, especially on day one of a presidency.
Yeah, of course. I'm just saying for me personally, I wouldn't normally spend an entire day watching an inauguration, but there's so many things on the line from a business standpoint that I'm like, is he going to change something? Is he going to address this? So anyways, I spent most of the day watching and like, come on, like get these executive orders out. What are they going to be? Yeah. And I just wanted to make a side note that whatever you think of Trump, it's pretty incredible. He went from like 7 a.m. till late last night. And he was non-stop. He was making speeches, he was dancing, he was doing all kinds of stuff. And for the guy who's, almost 80, I'm like, holy smokes, this is wild. When's this like Energizer Bunny gonna run out? It's pretty impressive.
Who lives off of Big Macs and Diet Coke.
Yeah, like just talk about a machine. That's like it's the peak male performance. So let's dive into some of the executive orders. We have a bunch here. I only picked the ones that I think are most interesting for people who are in our shoes, who are investing, building businesses, looking at international opportunities, and trying to, as you said, skate where the puck is going. So we can kind of go back and forth on these executive orders, but the first one I thought was interesting is designating cartels and other organizations as foreign terrorist organizations and specially designated global terrorists. Now, this is pretty clear what's going on here. Basically, the U.S. is saying, hey, the cartels in Mexico, you guys are terrorists, we're going to come after you. And I think there's several things to talk about here. First of all, this needs to happen. Nobody likes to say Mexico is a cartel state. It's interesting that Americans are concerned about going around the world traveling. Mexico is by far the most dangerous country in the world, and it's on our border. The fact that we've just kind of turned a blind eye to this
is it? Is that true?
Yes. Go look up at the top 10 most dangerous cities in the world right now. 8 of those cities are in Mexico. 8 of them. 8 of the top 10 most dangerous cities in the world are in Mexico right now. There was more homicides in Mexico than Middle East wars over the past several years. I don't want to. I'm excluding Gaza and everything, Palestine, because of the Palestinians, because that's newer, but the older data. Anyway, my point is that we've just turned a blind eye to this entire cartel issue, and Mexico is a cartel-run state. Are you fact-checking me right now?
I'm fact-checking you. You're right.
Okay.
You're right. And you know what? What's crazy? This is highest homicide rates in the world. It's top 10. It's actually 9 out of 10.
Okay. Are in
with
Mexico.
1 in the U.S.
St. Louis, isn't it?
No, it's New Orleans.
New Orleans. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so we're talking about per 100,000. But yeah, you're right. It's crazy. I mean,
and this is mostly
bang, bang, bang.
cartel on cartel violence. But there's a lot of innocent bystanders. The point is that we have this cartel war going on in Mexico, and we've just kind of ignored it. So this isn't surprising to me, but I think this is a pretty big deal. This is a good thing for Mexico. A lot of the citizens in Mexico, on one hand, it's gonna be scary because there's gonna be a lot more violence probably as this crackdown starts to happen. But this can't keep going on. And Claudia Sheinbaum, who's the current president of Mexico, has turned a blind eye to all of this. She's been the mayor of Mexico City prior to this. She just totally just let it exist. So this is good for Mexico and the U.S. in the long run.
One of the other ones I'll double click on is he's withdrawing the United States from the World Health Organization. So that's interesting. There's a lot of talk about it, but they were WHO obviously got a lot of press during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the whole breakdown of this is that due to the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, they don't trust it. They're pulling out. So they're withdrawing from the World Health Organization, and it's done on. Yeah, that's it. I think it's just done. They're out. So there'll be no more funds. There'll be no more people working with it, and they will find one that is going to take over the duties of the World Health Organization and do it from within the U.S. Interesting.
I agree with this one, and I'll throw another one out here that's controversial, is the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord. And this is such a hot topic. People are instant to say, oh my gosh, Trump hates the environment. I did a deep dive on all this morning just to really get the facts straight on this. We totally should not be in the Paris Climate Accord, and I'll tell you why. First of all, the U.S. is the number one nation contributing funds to actually fund the Paris Climate Accord. And the Paris Climate Accord is an agreement that 192 nations around the world have gone into to state how they are going to decrease their pollution, basically. They are trying to cap the amount of degrees Celsius that the Earth rises in the coming years. The point where I'm going to get to is that the U.S. has contributed all the funds, and the U.S. is one of the leading countries to actually committing to many of these environmental standards to lower the emission of greenhouse gases. Guess who doesn't contribute money? China. They don't contribute money to the Paris Climate Accords. And guess what? They are the number one builder of coal power plants in the world by far. They are by far one of the largest greenhouse gas producers in the world. And so we're a part of this agreement with all these other countries, and the other countries aren't actually playing ball with what the agreement states. So it's a total cluster F, and the U.S. is pouring money into this thing, lighting money on fire. We should not be a part of it. It's an unfair agreement, and Trump is totally right to get out of that.
So I'll take the other side of this, which came from somebody. I was having a conversation in the sauna with somebody who was all bent out of shape about the inauguration, right? He was talking about it.
TDS?
Well, I mean, I think that not necessarily. Not everybody who has different view is TDS, right? That's like, and that's, he just was saying, well, what's the point, right? If we don't make changes on our end, and we just live kind of in a fatalistic viewpoint that like whatever we do doesn't matter. China's going to build 100 coal plants, and they're, what are they now? 4 or 5 times the population of the U.S. So it doesn't really matter what we do. Because like, should we just give up and just stop caring? And I think that's the argument is like, well, we can at least lead the way, showing what could be done. Do I agree with that? I'm not totally sure.
But that is the point. We are leading the way. We have shown what should be done, and the other countries aren't doing it, which is why we should pull out of the accords. We're basically paying money to help other countries catch up to what we've been doing, and they aren't doing it. So it's not fair. And I would love to hear
I agree. It's not fair. I don't think it's fair. I'm just saying the other side of it is like, does it have to be fair?
Yes, it does have to be fair if we're spending money. If our U.S. tax dollars are going to fund this thing, it absolutely needs to be fair. If it's not fair, we should pull out, which is what we're doing. And by the way, the directive that says this, you can look this up. It's not actually called the Paris Climate Accord Directive. It's called the Putting America First in International Environmental Agreements. So I predict, it's pretty clear that there's going to be other agreements we pull out of in the coming years too, where they are unfair deals and U.S. tax dollars are going into agreements that just aren't fair. So the Paris Climate Accord is perhaps one of the first agreements we're going to be pulling out of.
It's interesting, and yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I'm just playing the other side because I think that's the big fear, right? The big fear is that he's just going to.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like a hot topic. Well, it's like Trump hates the environment.
And my argument is that there's this idea that we haven't been drilling, or this idea that it's going to be a massive change to the way we extract energy from the earth. It's not really going to be that much of a change. Yeah, there are a couple of things that are changing. One of them is this unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential. This one, I feel a little bit uncomfortable with. Parts of it are good, I think, and parts of it make me uncomfortable, specifically around like seafood. And the idea is that there's a lot of untapped supplies of natural resources, and that we want to give them more sovereignty to be able to use and extract some of the resources and sell them to Americans. I'm generally in favor of it, but it makes me uncomfortable because there's a bunch of, non-renewable resources like seafood that we need to do a better job of managing. And I think already, like last time I was up in Alaska, talking to the fishermen, they're like, we need to stop fishing Alaska's fisheries for like 4 to 6 years to let them come back and then manage them again. And so makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about specifically is this executive order of utilizing Alaska's resources more aggressively. And I agree with you. I mean, by the way, I'm like totally pro protect the climate. I'm like you, I'm very much into nature and all that. So I'm not like saying that we should just, ignore all this. I just think a lot of the things we consume in the US, we don't realize we're just exporting our environmental damage. Meaning when we import rare earth metals or when we import food from other places, the damage is being done in other parts of the world. So I think what Trump's trying to do is reshore a lot of our consumption to the US. So one, we rely more on ourselves. We're not relying on other people, but we also can have more efficient ways to do this. As it pertains to Alaska specifically, yes, the fishing and all that's an issue, but I think the other part of the story is the oil, gas, and minerals. That
it's way more oil, gas, and minerals than it is fishing.
Yes, and I think that's more what the focus of that directive was. So we're not relying on importing minerals, oil, and gas from other parts of the world. And by the way, like I said, it would be great if we didn't have to do any of this, but the reality is right now we are importing many minerals from parts of Africa where there's child labor, they're just ravaging the environment, there's just obscene amounts of safety hazards, and we are importing all of that, just kind of turning a blind eye to it.
I would recommend, it's not going to take too much of your time if you're listening to this and you're interested. Ignore some of the reporting, ignore some of the headlines, and just go read some of the executive orders, or go to Perplexity and ask what are some of the things that have just passed, and go read about them, and go do a breakdown, and ask yourself, like, do you agree or disagree with some of them? Because I think that's a better way than what happens, which is a small percentage of a bill gets like latched on and then, reported in a way that is politicized.
I think also a good thing to note about all these executive orders, there was 42 of them announced in the first day. I read through almost all of them on the White House website. They're all pretty vague and gray area. So I think what he was trying to do is announce all of these things that address bigger picture issues, but the details of how they're going to be corrected or executed on are still in this gray area. So I have a couple more I want to go over really quickly. Another one is, and this doesn't have to do with any controversial stuff that we were just talking about. This is more about the actual government running itself. So there was multiple executive orders related to government hiring and employment. So there's a hiring freeze. There's no more DEI. He announced male and female only. You can only relate to someone as a male or female. Restoring merit to the hiring process, restoring accountability for senior executives, mandatory return to work in person for all government employees.
Is that for everyone?
That's what it says in the announcement. I don't want to get into the DEI male female stuff because I feel like you can never win that debate or have an agreement there. But the latter parts, this is pretty clear. Restore accountability for senior executives. Yeah, I don't want a career politician or a career government executive being able to just do whatever he wants and never have the threat of being fired. They need to perform. How about restoring merit to hiring process? Yes, I want the most qualified person to be employed, regardless of their race, religion, whatever. The last one, be in office and work full time. Yes, I want government workers to be working. this is like common sense stuff, and I'm glad that this is being brought out and made a directive.
Yeah. I don't know. Like some of those, I got to read them because that's like, is it just lip service? Like if you just say we're going to restore accountability, what does that even mean? Right? If you're we're going to restore marriage to the hiring process, what does that even mean?
Well, specifically for, let's say, restoring accountability for senior executives, there's actual protections for government employees where they cannot be fired. I mean, I had first.
I agree with removing those for
like,
sure.
you can have like DUI, drug offenses. You can have like a felony, and many government employees are like, oh, well, you just go to a month-long, course where you get educated on how not to do that again, and there's no real threat. No, I'm serious. That actually exists, and so like that should not be a policy that the U.S. government has. We should have policies in place where if you jeopardize your reputation as an individual, there are consequences, and you may
It should
not
be competitive.
Yes, absolutely.
Should be competitive. There should be consequences. I think we were talking about this that with the right now, very few people are most people are working from home. Right after COVID, a lot of government employees are actually working from home, but they have a requirement to be in office, I think 1 day a month. And so what people are doing is they're scheduling their trips in, and they're working the last day of the month and the first day of the month, and then moving. They just fly in, get a hotel, work 2 days in a row, and then fly back to wherever they're living in a much lower cost of living state, and just do this commute once a month.
Fleecing taxpayers. Just
yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're fleecing taxpayers. I can imagine that it's not as productive as it was when people were all together, and some of those people will immediately get either resign or get fired if this plays out the way that it looks like it's playing out. So go take a look. It's interesting. I think, do you have any other ones that you really
I have
want to
two
dial in
more
on?
because they relate to investing internationally, which we both are.
I
very
like how
interested
fired
in.
up you are about this.
I am fired up. You know why? Because I've been waiting for a long time to have direction about how to invest or where to do business. And I think a lot of people have in all parts of our economy, which is the past 4 years have more or less been this like, what's going on here? Yeah, but what's going on? Like, I don't feel comfortable making a decision about something because there's no certainty about what direction we're going. And for me, a lot of these executive orders at least start to lay out this map where I can make an educated decision of what to do. So two more executive orders I think are interesting. One was an announcement about the OECD global tax. During Biden's presidency, the U.S. had agreed to participate in this global tax scheme, which involved a lot of information sharing, but also paying these taxes. We're pulling out of that. We're basically saying, hey, we have our own tax system. We're not going to play ball with these other tax systems because your other tax systems aren't fair to us, but they're also implementing taxes that don't even benefit us. So this is ridiculous. So I think there's going to be a lot of trade toss-ups. Let's set aside tariffs for a second. Just in general, people trying to figure out where these new tax regimes are going to end up. There's going to be a lot of trade shifts in terms of who's doing business with what. So a lot of conflict, but a lot of opportunity for investors. And then the second thing is I'm going to quote this one, which is reevaluating and realigning United States foreign aid. Foreign aid is become a complete disaster for the United States. And that's because the U.S. is giving money to certain countries for favors. It's just like we're bribing people. And in the worst case, in many African nations, we're giving money free, like just giving money to these countries. The money is completely being absorbed by dictators or corrupt officials. And the payoff that we get in return is access to minerals or mining or oil or gas or cheap labor or whatever it is. That's like modern day slavery, more or less. We're just paying our way, paying higher end people off and then getting free labor or, raping the environment. It's just not right. So the whole foreign aid scheme that's going on with the United States needs a complete overhaul. I personally don't think we should be doing any foreign aid. I'm not against helping countries, but it should be in a way where it's an investment, where it's a return for the United States, and it's also a benefit for the other country. But we can't just keep giving money away. That's the quickest way to incentivize somebody or a country to do nothing and just rely on the money we're giving them. So I think there's going to be a huge opportunity for investors who see countries that are going to get the foreign aid cut off, and they need to perform to attract foreign investment from the U.S. or other countries. So there are going to be some business opportunities there.
I'm going to read a couple things from this because I think it's interesting. One, it just says that no longer will we be doing any foreign aid that is not aligned with the president and his foreign policy decisions. So that's number one. Number two, they're going to have a 90-day pause in the U.S. foreign development assistance for an assessment of programmatic efficiencies and consistencies with the United States foreign policy. Interesting. Then they're going to review all of the United States foreign assistance programs and then determine in the next 90 days which ones they're going to continue, modify, or cease. So we can kind of expect a lot of changes there. And That's interesting.
Yeah, and he gave a directive to Marco Rubio, who is now our Secretary of State, replacing Antony Blinken. So Rubio is now the Secretary of State, and his directive, Trump's directive to Rubio was America first for anything you're negotiating. And a lot of what Blinken was negotiating and all these foreign aid deals and arrangements with other countries, a lot of times the U.S. was just a participant in a lot of these deals, and we were actually getting the short end of the stick in a lot of the negotiating. And so Trump's directive to Rubio specifically was, we need to be getting something that's overall positive for the U.S. So I expect a lot of relationships globally to start changing. And I think that's
and if they don't
good
work, they're going to cease, right?
Exactly.
If you can't make it, you can't make a deal work that is good for the U.S., they're going to go away.
That's how you run a business, and that's how you should run a country, in a profitable, sustainable way where you can grow.
What's the flip side of that, right? The argument for the other side is that a lot of what we're doing when we go over there and we provide like goodwill or foreign aid is that we're creating goodwill that we can cash in on later, right? And that we don't have to cash in on day one.
Of course. I think that's the general thought of what the U.S. has been historically, which is we're spreading democracy. Of course, it's turned into a joke. We're spreading democracy by bombing you into submission. But I think, 40, 50 years ago, it was, hey, the U.S. is trying to come in and open up free markets, allow people to vote for who they want to lead a country. And that's been completely just transformed over the past couple of decades to the point where we're doing more harm than good with a lot of the involvement we have with these foreign, sovereign nations.
Yeah. I'm all for a reassessment of what we're doing in foreign aid. And there's also a great book called Dead Aid. I don't know if you've ever read this book, but it talks about a lot of the foreign aid in Africa and how counterproductive that it is. And, the second order consequences of going in and providing aid to a lot of these countries and to these small communities is that you cut them off from them ever developing something that is sustaining. And they have many examples in this book, but it's like, the classic, you go and drop a bunch of mosquito nets, and then the local people who were creating mosquito nets are all out of a job. There's a bunch of mosquito nets that start to be using for like fishing, and then the fishermen are out of a job. There's like crazy second order consequences that come from all the aid that we do. So
yeah, it's a classic, do you give a man fish or do you teach him to fish? And of course there's complicated situations, but U.S. foreign aid and foreign involvement in other countries has turned into that, where we are actually preventing the advancement and development of certain economies. And in fact, in some circumstances, I would even argue that the U.S. is intentionally doing that to
for sure.
ensure certain economies don't flourish, because then that would be competition. And it's turned into this entire thing where we don't really know what we're doing with our foreign policy. We're a ship with money leaking out of every hole.
There's definitely more clarity on foreign policy. That's for sure. That is for sure. And I'm very interested to see how this continues to play out. I want to shift topics a little bit here and talk about what's happening in Belarus, specifically that Russia is absorbing Belarus, maybe like a big octopus, kind of just grabbing and swallowing it up. So there's a report from the Institute for the Study of War released. They released an in-depth 100-page report explaining that Russia's process to annex Belarus. I'm going to quote from the report, and then we'll get into it a little bit. So from the report, Russia's effort to de facto annex Belarus, while incomplete, is in a very advanced stage and has already achieved milestones that pose security threats to the United States, NATO, and Ukraine, and an existential threat to Belarus's continued existence as a sovereign state. Russia does not need to make any additional integration gains in Belarus to threaten the West. Russia's existing suite of military, political, and economic integration gains in Belarus since 2020 already pose threats to the West that policymakers must consider. All right, Cody, what is going on in Belarus that we don't know? Give us a little primer and some of the takeaways from the report that you've read.
So the report's free, by the way. You can go to the Institute for the Study of War. Incredible resource to anybody who's interested that's about geopolitics. And this report, it's a huge report. So if you are not like me and don't like going through 100-page reports about this stuff, I'll give you the summary, which is Belarus is more or less just a state of Russia. And most people have known this for a long time, but the report really dives into specifically what's happening. Like, it's one thing to say that Belarus is a state of Russia, and that's another thing to actually outline what's going on. So I'm going to...
Well, before we do that, like, why does Belarus even matter?
So Belarus is very strategically aligned. If we should throw a map picture up, just so
We'll put a map up.
Okay, so it borders Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine, and of course Russia. So it's kind of another country similar to Ukraine, having
but
smaller, but in terms of the buffer zone within NATO versus or compared to Russia. It was more or less a buffer country, but the reality is that it's Russia, and Russia's ability to put influence on its bordering states on the NATO alliance is more than ever. And we saw this by what was going on in Ukraine, which was Russia was operating in Belarus to move equipment and to cross the border into Ukraine. So why does this matter? It's just another one of those things that Russia is doing behind the scenes and no one's paying attention to, because we're focused on the US election, we're focused on the economy, we're focused on cryptocurrencies, we're focused on everything. And Russia is just slowly, patiently spreading its influence. And Belarus, I would say, after reading this report, I'll go through the bullet points in just a second. After reading this report, I'm like, this is just a state of Russia. I mean, this is Russia now. And people should know this. People should understand what's going on here.
What is the so this report outlines a bunch of stuff, right? It talks a little bit about like economic control, military integration, cultural and information influence that Russia has in Belarus, their strategic advantage against NATO in the West. What is the most concerning part to you about Russia and Belarus working together and effectively, the takeover that Russia has done in Belarus?
I think the best way to explain this would be if you have, let's say, two militaries from two different countries, and they all of a sudden had to work together. There's many countries that just would not work, meaning you have different equipment, you have a different language, you have different command structure, you have different strategies, different tactics, etc. If you look at the U.S., we are very well aligned with the U.K., Australia, even France and other NATO countries.
Canada.
Exactly, Canada. And we even provide U.S. manufactured weapons, equipment, jets, etc. for them. So we literally are working under the same equipment. You could say that that's exactly what Russia is doing with Belarus. And if you're a Russian, you're probably saying, well, America does the same thing. And we do the same thing. The difference is that what is going on in Belarus is that Russia is also taking over its government parts as well. So when you look at who's being put into certain office, when you look at how elections are being run, when you look at the legal system of Belarus, when you look at almost everything having to do with Belarus society, economy, and war capability, it's completely intergrained with Russia now, even with manufacturing of actual equipment and supplies of labor, technology, and raw resources. And so let me just go down this. It's
like a member of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, it's a state of Russia. So the bullet points are military integration, as you mentioned, and this includes deploying Russian military personnel and positioning Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but the report very clearly articulates it. The second thing is political union, and this involves discussions on a Russian-Belarusian union state with shared political structures, which would significantly reduce Belarus's sovereignty. We already knew this. Economic control, and this would mean that economic policies and resources in Belarus would increasingly be controlled by Moscow. Again, no surprise, but this is just happening more and more. So this list is long, and I won't go down all of it.
The one that I think is interesting is that there's been moves to harmonize their legal systems to push in Russian laws and have Russian laws apply in Belarus. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and again, this support's huge. You can look at it for yourself, but that's exactly what I'm getting at in terms of it just being blended all together. And you can make an
argument for the people that talk about how, if we don't stop Russia and Ukraine, that they're going to continue to push push west.
100%, and that's basically
Yeah.
what this report is saying. It's a very high view of what's happening with Russia and the Russian Empire, I'll say, because the same thing is happening in Georgia. The same thing is happening in really the entire region around Georgia with this Russian influence. The same things happen in a lot of African nations, which is this influence of Russia in other parts of the world that may seem not super important to a Western country, but if you play it out 10 years from now, it could be disastrous for the US or for other Western countries because we're going to get cut off from certain resources or certain relationships. And this report articulates exactly how Belarus has basically fallen. Belarus, you write it off. That's part of Russia now. And if we don't pay attention to what's going on, there's going to be more and more countries. And if I was Lithuania or Latvia right now, which border Belarus, and are former Soviet, or formerly part of the USSR, I would be super concerned. I would be very, very concerned about what's happening next. You know, in the US, we're very lucky to be isolated from a lot of these issues. But if we really are going to align ourselves with these countries that are concerned about being taken over by Russia, like this is a real thing we have to address now. Are we going to back these countries up or are we not? Like what's going to happen here? Because Russia is moving forward with doing this.
Well, and it's also it's a better way to take over than through military force, right? It's in a sense, it's running the same playbook we run, where you infiltrate, try to put in a political leader who is sympathetic to the views of the United States, right? We've done this all over, where you find somebody, you back them internally, and then you turn over the government, and now boom, the government is now goes from being anti-Russian to pro-Russian. Not that Belarus was like anti-Russian. I think they're very Russian. But
well, that's what
like,
happened in Ukraine in 2014.
Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, that sort of thing.
There was a Russian aligned president in Ukraine. There was the Orange Revolution in 2014 that the U.S. clearly backed, and we put in a pro-West president. And then Russia was like, screw that. And we know what happened there. But that's, I guess, pointing to Belarus, what could happen there or in these other Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia region. So we'll see what happens there. But I think
so. Are you investing in Belarus?
I think like 10 years ago, my adventure side of investing was like, this is an opportunity. Everyone's like, thinks this is overblown. But now that I'm like much more, I guess, experienced and have had my teeth kicked in on many experiences like this, I'm like, I ain't touching this. I am not getting involved in anything around here. This is the surest way to move money or lose money.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting. Something to watch, and it's fascinating to see all these things going on. Again, back to like one of the predictions I've made is that I think the Ukraine war is going to be settled pretty quickly, and there's a lot of conversation about the war in Ukraine. Like,
well, Putin said yesterday, right? He said, "I'm willing to talk with Trump now about a path to peace in Ukraine."
So, I think that probably the other argument is that this gives Russia more of the buffer that they're looking for. They've got Belarus, and if they settle in Ukraine, then that could be enough of a buffer for them to stop. So I could take the other side of that. Yeah. And considering that Putin has
this train doesn't stop.
Well, he's specifically talked about how he wants a buffer. There's just it's an existential threat to not have a buffer between them and NATO. So
right.
We'll see. We're going to go to the adventure corner, right? For the adventurous travelers out there, there's some exciting news for you, adventurous travelers. North Korea is opening back up for tourists. The country's not been open to tourists since the start of the pandemic in January 2020, but it is back on the menu. So if you've been dreaming of a North Korean vacation, apparently Rason, I think it's how you say it. It's located in the northeast of North Korea, has officially opened for tourism, and they don't know yet like what that means, whether there'll be private tours or what capacity they'll permit group tours. All that matters is that now you can go to North Korea. So we're going to see some Instagram influencers, YouTubers heading back to North Korea and popping up. Do you have any interest?
Yeah, of course I have interest. Am I going to do it? No, I'm not. Again, this is one of those 10 years ago thing. If 10 years ago, I would have been actually tried to get in there a couple of times. You have to do it through a tour, through a company.
Yeah.
And just to give this company a shout out, it's Koryo Tours, Koryo Tours. I have no affiliation with them other than I've been on their mailing list for a long time. And they're kind of one of the preferred tour operators in a lot of Asia and in North Korea. And it looks super interesting. Like I want to go to. I'm very curious about strange places. I think now what's going on in the world, I wouldn't get near there. Just the risk of going in and never coming out is too high for me, especially with kids now. But hey, maybe that'll change in the coming years. You know, the one U.S. president that has stepped foot in North Korea and shook hands with a North Korean leader is back in office. So maybe
Rodman's still alive.
Robin's still alive. Maybe we're gonna have direct flights from L.A. to Pyongyang pretty soon.
Maybe there'll be a Trump Tower at Pyongyang.
Yeah, but on a serious note, I do know several people that have been in North Korea and have said it's one of the most fascinating, adventures you could ever be on in terms of how controlled you are when you are there. And were you in Uzbekistan or Tajikistan?
No, Turkmenistan.
Turkmenistan,
which is like the Pyongyang of. I mean, it's like a Pyongyang. It's very, very bizarre. It's run by a dictator. You have to have a guide, and we were shuttled all over that place, and the experience, I'll never forget it because you're going around a city that it's like Pyongyang kind of mixed with Vegas because they have all the leader was obsessed with breaking Guinness World Records. So he's built all these insane buildings that happen to break Guinness World Records, like the largest, I think it's the largest Ferris wheel that nobody goes on. Like nobody's on it. There's all these buildings that are like triangles and weird shapes that have broken Guinness World Records, but there's nobody there, like none of the locals. And they took us to this market where it was supposed to be like, here, you're going to interact with the locals. You get there, it's all paid actors, right? They take you into like a hut. They're feeding you the local food. Everything is completely, there was even like fake fruit. Like they set it up so that it looked like there was more fruit. It was very bizarre. And then they drop you off at your hotel, which is isolated from the rest. So you can't walk anywhere. Like you couldn't get out and walk on your own. It was miles away. You're kind of in this isolated bubble. Yeah, I mean, I'm interested for sure. I would love to go.
I mean, that's what this Koryo Tours is proposing, which is this guided tour of North Korea where you get to see a very, I guess, you get to see the facade.
A very sanitized version of North Korea. Although it did say that not all of North Korea is open, just this one special economic zone bordering Russia and China. And there's a Pyongyang marathon.
Yeah, so there's a couple big activities. I have a friend who's run this marathon. There's a couple big activities that happen in North Korea that it's kind of like a badge on your chest to have accomplished. And one of them, like you said, is the Pyongyang Marathon, which has been a huge event for people to come into North Korea because it was one of the only ways you could actually have an excuse to get the visa and the tour guide to actually get in the country. Oh, I'm going to run this marathon.
That's cool.
So, if you're a runner or you are a wannabe runner, this is a way to hack your way into North Korea. That is a bucket list marathon, I'll tell you that. And I guess, so my buddy who ran it said the entire way, what is it, 26.7 miles? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
The entire way, there was people on the side, like going crazy, like they're at some like rock concert, just absolutely going ballistic. So he's like saying he was running, he had like one of his best times ever just because everyone was cheering him the entire time. So that is an epic bucket list marathon. I mean, if you're a runner, hit the Pyongyang, how do you top that? Yeah.
Also, I mean, North Korean food is great. I don't know if you know about this, but all around the world, one of the ways that North Korea has made money and also tried to spread kind of like their influence and goodwill is they create restaurants Do you know about this?
I have no idea about this. I was gonna make a joke about like gourmet North Korean food being like cat
No,
and
no,
dog
no, no,
or
no,
something.
no, no, no. Okay, so here's what they do. This is very interesting. So they have restaurants all over the world that are these North Korean restaurants, and they send people from North Korea internationally to go run these things, and you can go stop in, go eat food there, and you're talking to people who are North Korean, and they're all trained in like propaganda and trying to, share their view of what North Korea is like. So Carla and I were in Bangkok years ago. We stumbled across one of these restaurants. We thought, this is very interesting. Let's go talk to them and start asking them questions about like what it's like to be in North Korea. And it was a very short conversation. They were like, we don't want to talk about that. We can't talk about this. Like it's a very bizarre thing. But if you're traveling around and you're in big cities in Asia all over, go search out the North Korean restaurants, and you'll find that you can go meet people who grew up in North Korea, who are representatives of North Korea. And you can talk to them. You can ask them about it, and you'll have interesting conversations with these people.
Where was this? Where what?
In Bangkok.
It was in Bangkok. Okay, so Thailand's got some of these. Obviously, no North Korean restaurants in the U.S., right?
I don't think so.
The U.S. State Department isn't providing visas for North Koreans to operate their restaurants in the U.S.
So there's an article about it here. Pyongyang restaurant is one of over 130 Pyongyang restaurants all across Asia, in China, Thailand, and Vietnam. There's a lot of like weirdness because effectively a lot of the people, so they send beautiful women to be servers, and they keep them. The criticism is that they're like slave workers. We don't really know what is going on there, but yeah, Pyongyang restaurants, 130 all over the U.S. or all over Asia, not the U.S. So if you're traveling over there, you can go take a look and learn about it. It's very strange, very, very strange. I think there's one in the only one I've been to is in Bangkok. So.
Well, I think now that I have multiple kids and have gotten a lot of my adventurous travel bug out of me, my bucket list morphed from going to Pyongyang to going to a Pyongyang restaurant in Bangkok.
I still want to go. I still think it'd be very interesting, and this is the time to make that happen. We'll see. Maybe we'll run a little venture capitalist trip to Pyongyang. Is it? Who knows? Well, who knows what happens in the next 4 years?
I don't know if I want that liability. Like that's going to be like, that's a blood contract that you're not going to sue us if something goes wrong.
Oh man. So last thing I'll update you on is, so I'm like 10 days. Speaking of traveling different places and having experiences with food that lead to consequences down the road. For the last like 10 years, I've been trying to figure out what has been, like, something's been wrong with me. Like my skin has been kind of messed up. Like it goes in waves up and down where like I get really bad like skin issues, and then they'll go away and come back, go away, come back. I've gone to freaking so many people to try to figure out what was going on with me. Recently, it got really bad over the last 6 months after spending time at my wife's family's house. They have a cat. I'm allergic to cats, and it triggered this like horrible skin reaction for me. Finally found out after literally 10 years of trying to figure this out, that I had contracted some parasites from my travel, most likely in Asia, and some of the food that I was eating. So I'm like 10 days into a parasite cleanse, and oh my God, man, I feel so much, I feel so different and so much better. And it's like a big kind of like cloud has been lifted from me.
That's like street cred, by the way. If you have a big stomach bug that lasts 10 years, That's like some serious traveler street cred.
It's so
So
gnarly.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For this cleanse you're on right now. Can you disclose what it involves, or is this too graphic for?
No.
listeners?
I mean, so I'll share this because for some people out there who might,
I think I might have this, by the way.
You might.
Not my
might.
skin, but like I just well, I won't get into it. But
Yeah. There's a person in the U.S. First of all, the U.S. is not a great place. Has not been a great place to get tested for parasites. There's not as many labs. Like it's most of this traditionally has been you have to do samples, send them to Africa for the real deal people who can find out what type of parasites you've got. There's one guy who I found who runs it's like a clinic or a testing company I want to say, I don't know exactly where it is. It's somewhere in the southeast. I think it's Arizona though. And this guy has made it his life mission to help people who have obscure parasites find out what they are. So you can send in a sample to this guy and you don't have to even have a doctor. You can just send it in. You join his little medical group. He will search and tell you if you have an obscure parasite. You have to write down all the places. I had to literally write down all the places I'd been in the last 10 years, every single country, every single thing. I wrote them all down, sent them in. And I've been tested for parasites before and gotten a negative. I sent it to him. He comes back and was like, no, you have two parasites. And so this guy's a hero, in my opinion, truly like it's changing my life. So you send it in and then he tells you like what you need to take. And I'm on like a bunch of parasite clearing medication, like anti-parasitic medication. Main consequences are that like when you do that, if you have a parasite like I've had for probably 10 years, it often flares you up and you feel horrible.
Right, because your body had adapted to the parasite.
Well, as it's dying and being killed, you often have it's like a Herx reaction, like a Herxheimer, which is mean your body like is almost overloaded with toxins, and so basically had like flu-like symptoms for a couple of days. That means that it's killing the parasites. So yeah, for any of you adventurous travelers, or any more people than you would expect actually have parasites. This is like a thing that is kind of underreported, especially if you got sick like a couple years ago or on a trip. You might have gotten one in Mexico, wherever you've gone, and so yeah.
Is the medicine or drugs or whatever you're taking right now, are they prescription or are they like over the counter? Oh, they are. Okay.
I'm taking prescription. You can go with like a natural one or a prescription one. I'm taking a prescription and a natural one because it's been so long. I've been dealing with this for so long. But yeah, it's wild. So maybe the Pyongyang restaurant, who knows? Maybe they're out there just dishing out parasites. That's their treat.
Yeah. Let me spread North Korean welcomeness to your gut.
one at a time. Yeah. So anyway, Pyongyang Marathon. That's on my list.
Sweet.
I'm adding it.
Love it.
So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We'll be back. We are going to be experimenting with some different style of episodes coming up. So stay tuned, and we'd love to hear from you. If you like the episode, if you don't like the episode, we'd like to hear from you. Hit us up on X. It's probably the best way. Find Austin and Cody on X. Love your guys' lives. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you on the next episode.